Good morning.
You two are the crazy minds behind this film. So
She's the crazy mind, I'm the sane mind.
I politely disagree with that statement. So I can ask you questions because you should hopefully know what you're doing and know what it's all about. Yes?
Is she casting aspersions? I did not realise it was that kind of interview.
I thought she was well aware of the fact that the film business is all an illusion.
Oh, I can see the panic that just entered your eyes, so illusion yourself a little bit better.
All right then, we're ready for you.
So, this is a very interesting film. It has a very strong story that has a lot of confliction in it and provides a lot of room for thinking and exploration, in my mind, anyway, from someone who read the script in its early stages. So, what inspired you to write this film, Icon of Betrayal?
Icon started as the idea of a woman in a red dress holding a knife dripping full of blood. That was the starting point. I had this image in my mind of a woman that shouldn't be holding a certain object, and yet she is. And then I worked backwards from there to decide how she got herself into that position. The story took several twists until eventually finding the right place for her to be. Because what I became aware of as I started thinking through how she got into that position was we could go very simply to get her there, or we could actually really just kind of delve into what would push somebody over the edge. And I think, unfortunately or fortunately, it seems to have become a bit of a theme in some of the things I've done of late is
I'm getting worried.
things that push people over the edge, because the project we did before this one was again about somebody being pushed over the edge and having to protect themselves. And I think Icon of Betrayal have very similar themes in that individuals in different positions are having a similar events triggering different responses, but essentially they're all being just pushed that little bit too far from where they want to be. And so it's that comfort zone thing. What are you willing to do to stay in your comfort zone? And that was quite a, dare I say it, enjoyable bit of the human psyche to mess around with and stick my writer finger in and go, see what comes out on the other end.
Deliciously enjoyable. One of the things that I found really interesting when reading the script, and obviously with this film in general, is how you sort of interweave the timelines, because you essentially have this starting point and then you're going forward with this interview, but you're also going back to follow what happened to get you to that point. What made you decide to tell it in such a, not necessarily complicated, but such a different structure to what I think many people would be used to?
I think it's fun to break the rules. Flashback or flash forward in film is used very regularly, but I started becoming intrigued by the idea of what if, as readers telling a story, the audience is also seeing the story play at the same time. And because film is a wonderfully visual medium, it gives us the freedom to do something in this instance that wouldn't work in live performance, in that we could essentially see the past and the present side by side. And so it became very entertaining to try and push that boundary and see how much I can make the audience also do a bit of work to come along the story. I find it's really nice to treat the audience, for me anyway, I like treating my audience as a part of the process, and I like them having input in that work they're doing to understand the story. Doesn't mean I like to just tell complicated stories, to be fair, but sometimes it makes for a complete package of entertainment when on screen and off screen we're all working together to get the most out of that moment.
Wonderful, thank you. Now, because I've talked to you very in-depthly, I'm going to pick on
Your turn.
You, because
I
I like picking on you.
Ain't that the truth?
And my first question for you is, how did you find beauty in the space that you were working with?
Actually, that was much easier this time than on some of the past films, because with the story being set in a single space, we had a lot more scope for paying closer attention to the set and making sure that there was interest all around from different angles and such like. And it also helps when the actors are giving performances that draw the eye, because that at the end of the day is the key. What's in the background is peripheral. What's in the background is just that. It's something that you should barely notice if the performances are great, and that was what helped this time.
Yeah, no, the performances definitely were very strong, especially because it was so much just the performance having to make it happen, and I think the casting worked very well from that point of view.
And the story is an emotional up and down roller coaster, effectively. So you've got to follow that path and that process. And it helps having things like beautiful roses all around and grand pianos help give you focal points from a set perspective, but they are just that. They are decorative dressing. The performance is what counts.
I very much agree. I do think that the performance is a very important part, and that the set is very much sort of just the frame for that picture that you're seeing. When you were developing the set, I can just turn this question to both of you. There is a certain element of symbolism, I guess, particularly with the roses in the set. And when did you decide that that was something that you wanted to implement?
I think pretty early on, actually. I think once the script was written, Reed's perspective is very much on the whole story. Also because she's narrating it. And so we're essentially seeing everything through Reed tinted spectacles, if that makes sense. We started building out collaboratively the idea that she wouldn't be comfortable in a space that is very much what you would expect in our contemporary timeline, which then also allowed a little bit of messing around with the fact that the space she's in isn't sitting so easily in, oh, that's 1975, or oh, that's 2020. And in a way that became a lot more fun because we could then play with those obsessive elements of her character in how we developed the set design, which then led us on to the idea of the symbolism of the rose. And the symbolism of the rose became quite fun to mess with people's heads, because with flowers, roses are often seen as a very perfect flower, and rose colors can mean a lot of things, like red is always passion and white is always purity. And then there's this idea that if you give somebody red and white roses together, you are actually not making a very positive comment, because you are in the traditional process, you're wanting them to die. You're saying, here you go. It's a compliment, but actually, can you just leave me alone? And so we kind of embroidered upon that. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. And the rose theme then became pivotal throughout the set design as a whole, from not just the roses themselves, but all the way through to the posters and the name of the films that Reed has starred in the past. And that was fun to actually kind of get into that. And when designing the posters that were on the wall, that was added extra elements of interest.
You do tend to like to add little details that might not be seen, but when they do get seen, they're quite fun for the audience to pick out.
One of the extra details in there is with the rose and the crown. One of the reasons why that poster is the way it is because Isabella's obsessed with castles.
So we drew a little bit on the actors' actual characters to three-dimensionalize what we were up to, and how we directed them as well, I think, in the end.
Yeah.
They won't appreciate me saying that.
In regards to the actors and sort of how they were playing the characters, when you were going through the whole audition process, because of course that was the starting point for finding the people you wanted to play these characters, did you find that you were like really surprised by the people you ended up going with because they offered you something that was so interesting?
Yes and no. If I answer that one first. Isabel wasn't a surprise in terms of being one of the strong auditionees, but initially we started the process very much with seeing her in the role of Penelope. And so when she gave such a strong performance on their audition for Reed, that was kind of a curveball. And it wasn't a totally unexpected curveball, but it was a curveball nonetheless. For Ed as Quentin, I was kind of expecting something from Ed, so I was glad when I got that on the audition. And Florence is obviously relatively new to the business, so it was kind of nice to get an audition from her that actually showed a lot of nuance in how she portrayed Penelope's character, just on that what was a very simple audition scene to start with very little backstory and back detail to it.
I think that was the thing that threw the actors auditioning the biggest curveball. Because we've worked with some of these performers on past Mentor Through Film projects, and because they're part of Tapping Frog, there's been quite a large relationship between us professionally. And I must admit, I felt very mean because several actors received the audition sides and then came back to me and said, "Oh, can we have more of the script? Oh, can you tell us more?" And I said, "No, absolutely not, because I want you all to start from that window into the character, and I would like to see what you can pull out of that before I give you more." And I know they felt very unexpected by that, but it's how our industry works. If you're doing projects, generally you only get a window to show a bit of that character's soul, and so we wanted to give them a similar process to what they're used to in the audition run. And I think that made it quite fun, quite terrifying, but also quite interesting, because some people made choices that were way out there, and some choices were really on the mark, and some choices were very safe. And so it really gives you an insight in people's working process as well, I think.
But it's also that separation of role, because obviously as agents and managers, we're always rooting for clients to be successful on every audition they go. In this occasion, you're having to take that step back and look at it from a casting perspective, and you're having to really microanalyze performances. And for some that will be good, and for others they will have not done as well as maybe we would have hoped to have done as agents or managers. And then there will be some where there was fairly tight competition, and you're having to make those very, very final decisions. And a lot of that comes down to then how a cast sits together. And so it's not just about their individual performance, it's about how they fit with other members of the cast that have already been cast and such like. And that's something that all casting directors have to go through.
Yeah.
And at times that can be an intense frustration to both agents and obviously the actors themselves. But it's a useful exercise to go through and to actually see it from the perspective of different roles. I think it's very important in this business that you try and see the situation from somebody else's eyes. So if you're an actor, maybe look at something from your agent's eyes. If you're an agent, look at something from a casting director's eyes, and a casting director look at something from a producer's eyes. At the end of the day, the objective is always the same. You want to try and get the cast that's going to have the best chemistry, that's going to produce the greatest performance in any particular film, to make that film have the best chance of being successful and of being as entertaining as everybody sets out intending in their film to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. What you're essentially creating is an ecosystem, and it needs to be an ecosystem that works together strongly. And I think the chemistry goes in so many directions, because it isn't just how the cast interact, it's how the cast and the crew interact, and at times we're all having different frustrations on set, especially because on this project more than any other, we were so limited in how many individuals we could have on set, because we're filming under really tight guidelines at the moment at a very difficult time for our industry, which means normally you could pick the phone up and say, okay, we need people to come in and do this and this and this. And this time around, most of us were doing 6 or 7 different jobs on every single take we were doing. And I knew that made a shooting schedule that's already working with a piece that is very intense, even more intense, because each of the crew members are trying to be really specific and do every job they're doing very well, but it does add time, it does add pressure. It also means there's a lot of ending a shoot day and going away and going, can I just lie down for a minute, because my head is still processing all the stuff you go through. And it's little things from continuity to how the performance on the acting side, to how it sits in the frame, to whether people are doing all right, to the fact that we're being hit with one of the biggest heat waves we've had in recent summers in the middle of filming, because hey, it's the year that keeps on giving, and you're worried about people's well-being and are they well hydrated, and so it's all these kind of layers added to it. But I'm very pleased to say that I think as a group working together made what we're going to be taken to the cutting room possible, because there's some really, really lovely, the rushes are looking lovely. So I'm from my lips to the universe's ears, I'm looking forward to seeing what this brings to the table for
and
us.
I mean, I'm hoping that the experience of how we've had to shoot this film is going to be a learning curve for everybody involved, because I think for the foreseeable future you're going to see more and more of this, and so the fact that we've had to bubble a large part of our cast and crew in order to get this done may well be something that actors are going to experience on other shoots and things like that, and so maybe having this experience on this film is going to stand them in good stead when they go onto a similar project.
And I have to say, I'm quite pleased with the way the cast has been so resilient, because it is tough when you're working together, you're living together, you're breathing together. There is no away, there is no headspace. And when you're already preparing a very taxing character, I think it could add a layer of complexity. So for something that's been a challenge in levels where most of the team hadn't expected a challenge, I think it's been really interesting to see how people have stepped up and pulled on the rope and said, you know what, I can do this, just let me at it.
I wanted to ask you more in depth about, because with all of the challenges that this year has presented, with obviously everything that's going on, it's meant that you've had to do things in such a different way than you would normally do. What kind of challenges did you face during the preparation period mostly?
The biggest challenge on the preparation period, in many ways, was not being able to definitively make a call whether the project was even going ahead until pretty much the day before. I mean, I was messaging the actors within the preceding couple of weeks, checking on whether they had any symptoms of virus and whether they were socially distancing adequately and things like that. And we were having to delay the decision because not only were we dealing with that, we were also dealing with changing guidelines almost day by day. And in many cases, those changes were being brought in overnight with very little warning or very little notice. So we literally got to the point where I had to make a call the day before shooting. The day before people were arriving on set to prepare to shoot. And that was tough. And I'm sure it was tough for the actors not having a final decision, but it was sure as hell stressful for me. Having to leave it as late as that. Normally we would already be sure of our filming dates when we're in that casting process.
Yeah. Normally we would essentially prepare our shoot schedule, how much time we need actors for, when we're going to do it. We would be finalizing most of that as we're starting to audition. Our process has reached a point where it's pretty slick in that we like to have as many of the answers as we possibly can as we start auditioning cast. And this year was extremely challenging, specifically because I'm very OCD with these things. And I hate when people ask me and I'm like, well, this is what I'd like to do, but became a large part of my vocabulary this year because we had to work for best case scenario, but back up in case that can't go ahead. And there was a lot of reviewing guidelines. As you've mentioned, there was a lot of ensuring that we'd gone through all the right safety training so that our health and safety process was up to scratch, so that our risk assessments were up to scratch, which is what pushed us into the decision that even though most of our cast is literally just up the road, we didn't want to take the risk. And we said to them, no, we would feel more comfortable to have us all bubbling, because that way, as a contained unit, because this story requires close contact work, we could ensure everybody was healthy and well, and nothing was introduced that would compromise anybody in this environment. And I think it's something that we're seeing with larger productions as well, that need to become confident with working in a different way. I think we can fight it and say, oh, but we want to go back to where we were. But I think realistically, we're the creative industries for a reason. We're creative, we sort out the problems, and we go forward.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, it helps that in this particular case, a large part of the crew are from within one household. So you're not introducing additional risks on the crew side too much. So that made it easier when it came to them bubbling the actors to make sure.
There's going to be a new epitaph, the filmmaking family.
Yes.
Did it add more pressure on you, though, to have to sort of deal with the actors? I mean that in the kindest way possible, 24/7, because you don't have that distance.
Only in the sense that you've got additional things like normally when we would finish filming for the day, my job would very much be to go and download and review the footage from that day, make sure everything is good, see how we're going.
Check if we need any additional shots.
Annarie would largely be preparing everything for the following day, and whether there were new adjustments to set or props and things like that. And we had all of that, but obviously then you're also having to deal with making sure people are well fed and everything is taken care of within a household effectively. And things like that. That just obviously there's only so much time in the day. Fortunately, one of the benefits that came out of this was because you're not having to worry and take a long time processing people arriving on set or leaving from set, because you're effectively living right next to the set. That saved time. So what you lost on, or what took more time on one hand, you saved on another.
On another, definitely.
And like in this particular occasion where the set was largely based within a single room, there was a lot less breakdown of equipment than there has been on other shoots as well, which
again that
made it actually a lot easier.
It also meant that we could essentially prepare almost to the point of having the camera ready to just position for when the actors arrive in the morning, and comparing that to shooting at a time when it was very, 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 very hot, I think became helpful, because it meant the actors had less wait time, where normally you would have actors arrive, be processed onto set, and then they would have a good 2 hours to get makeup, costume, cup of coffee, all of that. It allowed the actors to do that in a much more relaxed way, because when they were in costume, we could literally step into set and start working. We weren't having, or we tried to avoid as much as possible large periods of actors being in costume when it's very hot. One of the dichotomies of film is you often film summer at winter and winter at summer. And because of the costume design for this story being quite specific, to create that feel of luxuriousness, a lot of the fabrics, unfortunately, are more expensive, hotter, heavier, and that does mean that it puts a physical pressure on the performers. But it did mean that whenever we had a lunch break, the performers were able to step out of costume for a period and just have a proper break, and then they had the space to be able to step back into costume, to go back into the scene pretty succinctly, I would say. And I think that just helped to that little bit. But I do think that the cast went through several cold showers to cope with filming. And I mean that in the most positive way.
No, and I think the heat wave was the biggest challenge more than anything else, because obviously you've got a number of people who are bubbling, working together and living together in the same space in the middle of a heat wave, where there was very little escape from that heat, particularly in the first week of filming. That was the biggest challenge.
I think in many ways, again, I'm going to come back to the fact that I think one of the biggest changes that happened with us all becoming, I would say, an extended family rather than a filming unit was I did kind of feel like suddenly I have a few more children, which was lovely.
Which in a sense helps, because we're tapping frog as a family anyway. So effectively it's already an extended family. They were just living in for a while.
It was really, sorry.
To go on from that point, though, because you are, with the actors staying here, we're all such a close team. We've been working together for these 2 weeks and being together essentially for the entire time. Do you feel like that, in a way, affects the chemistry between the performers in particular on set?
I think in a positive way, yes.
Yeah.
It's allowed them more time to work together, which I think on screen has resulted in the relationships being more bonded. And for the nature of our main cast particularly, that I think is a very positive thing, because it almost subconsciously built into the characters and how long they knew each other on camera.
In the evenings, they've been able to go through lines together rather than with other people where they may be having a slightly different nuance on the response than they would then get on set. So because they've been able to go through things together each evening, I think has no doubt helped.
And it helped me directing, because they would be coming in already having run that scene the evening before in rehearsal, which would mean I could see how they sat with a character for that moment in time, and then it allowed the tweaks or developments or notes I was giving to be much more focused, rather than normally we would get on set, we would run lines, and you would have a good period of adjusting people into it. Here, the first runs of the day while we were deciding camera position was actually very succinct comparatively to past processes, because they were already so ready to get into that moment. And I do think, again, it made the process a little bit easier, because it also then opened up more time for camera movement to be developed into it. And I know that's the hardest part for actors, because they have to keep that continuation over multiple scenes and repeat it and repeat it and repeat it, because again, the size and nature of our space meant it wasn't conducive to doing 2 or 3 camera filming. So it does become a more intense process, but I also think there's been some very, very lovely moments coming out of the willingness of the performers to just delve that bit deeper and really find the nugget of gold underneath that moment that the character's experiencing.
Lovely, thank you. Taking a slightly different direction, I guess. I think something that, for me personally, I think is so amazing about Mentor Through film in general and the projects you do is that you have such a limited amount of crew, but yet you still manage to create something that looks so high quality and so professional. And
that's your fault.
The question I have is, obviously both of you end up taking more than one role to the point where you have an extreme workload, and that presents so many challenges for you when you are filming. How do you overcome those challenges to make sure that you are still focusing on what needs to be focused on at that time, if that makes sense?
That's a very deep question. We don't think about it, we just do.
Well, the job of a producer at the end of the day is you have to get the job done. You have to produce something, you have to get something out. And so you have to have a degree of tenacity and stubbornness about you to say, no matter what is thrown at us.
Stubbornness, definitely.
Yeah.
She's thinking you have that in
large
large quantities.
You have to make sure you get things done. And so there is a degree of, you need to make sure you've got time management. So and it becomes habitual as well. So for instance, the minute shooting finishes, I immediately take the footage to download and review. So that's done at the end of the day, and you don't forget that process, because you don't want to ever be in a situation where you've lost something that you've spent so long actually capturing. But yeah, it is tough having multiple roles, and obviously the work for the crew side goes on long beyond
and
at the end of filming
before,
and starts long
that's
before
a
the end of
general
filming.
problem.
And so you're also kind of putting on different hats at different times. And there are advantages to doing different positions and carrying out different roles as well. So for instance, while I'm director of photography on set, I'm also got in the back of my mind the fact that I'm also the editor. So you are already starting to piece together things within the edit when you're capturing those shots. And I actually think that can be a huge advantage, because you're already starting to see things, where they're going and what shape they are taking.
I'm going to cut you off here. I think because we have such limited resources, the capacity to really direct them well becomes key. And so it means instead of just spending a week filming one moment and then going to the editing suite to go, oh, darn it, we missed that bit, because we're more wired into where these moments are going in that final edit, I think it means we're focusing more on exactly what we need. We're essentially going back to how they used to do it on celluloid, where you have to be knowing what those shots are going to do. Otherwise, don't really waste time doing them.
Ironically, there's probably less wastage.
Very much so.
On one of our sets, because when it comes to the end footage, there's probably a lot less of it that's left on the cutting room floor.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I think that's also a positive thing, because we've reached a point working together now where we will have a take happen and we'll go to cut and we'll just look at each other and we'll know that is the take that's going to be in the edit, because we'll just know a moment of magic has happened there.
I'm gonna
and there's also another fundamental thing that I think we all should remember is when you do something you actually enjoy doing, even though it might physically be hard work, it's actually just fun. It's not that hard work.
That's true.
You've got to get a lot done, but you are enjoying what you're doing, so therefore it becomes actually just living.
Well, that's a good way to put it. I think I would very much agree with that. Do you think that because you have such a wide range of tasks and roles that you are carrying out, that you find you have a greater appreciation for sort of everything that goes into making a film?
Absolutely.
Undoubtedly, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, at the end of the day, you never stop learning. And what you've now got is the ability to learn in many different areas, which I actually think is kind of cool.
I think it also means you have a lot more patience and a lot more understanding when you're on a project where somebody else is taking that task or that role, because you're invariably going to go into it having a conversation with that individual where you're going to be more patient, because you're going to know why they're being particular, or why they're asking that to happen again, or why they're saying, no, that isn't good enough, we need to change this. Because you've worn that hat, so you've had to do that same thing. So I think it really, again, helps when you're on a bigger project as well, because you are more patient, you're more kind, coming back to that favorite word. And so again, the teamwork, again, even on larger projects, becomes stronger as a result.
And also with Mentor Through Film, we are not just trying to grow and develop actors, we are also trying to grow and develop crew positions and people working behind the scenes as well. And so the progression has been quite nice to see. On our very early film, it was very much the two of us wearing virtually every hat. Then we've started to introduce people who are helping out on and working on certain different roles. And so like this time we've had Brian Twitty on sound, which has been an immense help, and that we'd already introduced on a previous film where we'd actually had someone working on the sound side of things. But this time we've also now introduced Helga Ragnar's on the team as a composer, which I'm very excited about, because I think I'm passionate about developing behind the scenes experience and opportunity as much as on camera.
Absolutely.
It's not all about you actors.
I think it's also important to realize that people are creatives.
Yes.
And I know sometimes I have actors looking at me quizzically when I say to them, you are a creative, because nobody's one-dimensional. And all of these other things you're doing actually feeds the part of you that's the actor. No matter how you look at it, everything you experience grow your experience for what you present. So I think it's really fundamental for actors to realize that they shouldn't just think other elements of the industry are incidental. They're actually very fundamental to their ability to be actors at the end of it.
Yeah, and I think one of the good things is a lot of the people we have working and helping in crew positions, including yourself, are actors or actresses themselves. And so having that experience of working off camera will ultimately make you better on camera. because you will also have more of an understanding and more of an appreciation for members of the crew into certain roles and how you can help them to get the best for you.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Yeah, that's all of the questions I have for you. Thank you very much.